This is Asha Dore with Totally Biased Reviews. I'm here talking with Sarah Pape about her book, Forgive the Animal.
I'm Sarah Pape. I live in Northern California and teach at CSU Chico, where I teach mostly creative writing and editing and publishing. I run our literary editing and publishing certificate program, so I get to work with a lot of feature editors and writers. Part of my job is to run our literary magazine, Watershed Review, as well as our small chapbook press, Flume Press. Both of those things are major joy in my life. I'm also on the literary committee for the 1078 Gallery here in town and work with a bunch of different writers locally who aren't necessarily affiliated with the university and try to get people connected to each other in the literary sense. And I also work as the co-director for the Northern California Writing Project, which is affiliated with the California Writing Project and the National Writing Project. And we work with K-12 teachers on teaching writing in the most general way. And I kind of do all the prompting for people to write or talk about books or things like that. So those are kind of all the things that I do here in Chico. My book is called Forgive the Animal. It's technically, I guess, a poetry collection, but it's, I would say, a hybrid of lyric nonfiction and poetry. It came out from Cornerstone Press in 2024.
I was going to ask you what genre you considered some of the longer pieces, because I'm often like trying to write poetry and then it ends up being a prose poem and then I'm like, is it poetry? I really like it though, and I like the like breaks into that narrative. It kind of like roots the poems into something different. It's really cool.
I started with poetry, almost 20 years ago, and I got my master's in poetry writing, and my thesis was in poetry. And then later on, I went back to get another degree in nonfiction. And so I think I often ask myself that same question of, is this an essay or is this a poem? And kind of let the process unfold. And sometimes I need a little more space to write in, and then I'm like, okay, this is an essay-sized idea or amount of content that I need to get to. But I think I still think in poem length thoughts. And so that's often where things start, even if they turn into prose at a certain point.
Do you want to talk about your process for writing this book specifically?
It was really long, long process. It was probably... Well, there's a poem in here called Prayer for 13, and that was for my kid when they were 13, and they're 28 now. So there's some very old pieces of writing in here. And then, because I started sending out a long time ago, getting rejections or whatever, I would kind of reshape the manuscript every couple of years to see if it wanted to be something else, and would take out the pieces that I just didn't think fit anymore, put in newer work. And so it was kind of just like a snake shedding its skin over and over again. The lyric nonfiction actually was probably one of the last revisions, because I had been working on this longer lyric piece about substance use disorder and doing a lot of research, but wanting to write it in a more lyrical way. And I just started kind of seeing what would happen if I put those next to some of the sections of poems, and found that I really liked it and that it opened up something new for me in terms of my understanding of what the work was about.
I'm interested in the title and the repeated title throughout it. Do you want to talk about that? I don't want to give anything away with the way that I'm asking questions, so.
I guess there are surprises to me when I was writing it, but the title came when I did a final round of revisions. I've been writing with this group of poets for probably close to a decade, and we would do what we would call 10 poem seasons, where we would write a poem a week for 10 weeks and then give feedback on each other's work. And so I knew these people really well, but only through poetry. Like, we didn't even meet until after like 8 years, I think. So it was like a very cool, like a true writing community. Like, that's all we knew of each other. And so it was very pure in that way. And so when I was really like ready to give up on this book and just be like, I just need to write another book because clearly this one doesn't have a place in the world, they were just like, hey, let's try one more round of feedback. where we just look at each other's manuscripts and try to give each other like a real loving but hardcore editorial view of it so that we can actually be like truth tellers for each other and see if we can get to the bottom of what the thing is that might be hanging it up in the world. We had like a worksheet that we worked off of where we looked at each other's strongest poems, what we thought the weakest poems were, 15 themes that we saw, all these potential titles and whatnot. And so when I did that, a friend in this group just really pointed out that like you have a lot of animals in this collection and they're doing all sorts of different cognitive work for you. And I mean, that was just kind of a side thought that they shared and it just kind of stuck with me. And I started thinking about like, well, okay, so the animal, like what is the animal? And it just kind of like arrived, forgive the animal. And it became almost like a little mantra that I started thinking through. And because I was thinking about harm reduction and substance use disorder a lot. And, you know, I have multiple threads of this storyline in my own family and intimate relationships. And so I was just like, you know, this idea of forgiveness is often at the heart of a lot of therapy or 12-step or things like that. And I just wanted to problematize it a little bit. I came from a religious upbringing, not extremely so, but enough that it made an impact. And that idea of forgiveness was also at the heart of a lot of things I was told when some of the like major trauma happened in my childhood, like just forgive, forgive, forgive. And I started thinking about like how absurd it is. You would never ask your cat for forgiveness. You would never ask a tree for forgiveness, that there's something intrinsic about us that doesn't have to beg to become pure or, you know, innocent or good. And so I guess I wanted to just make something of that. That became the repeating title as a way to keep coming back to that idea, that strangeness of our animal self, and that at the bottom of it, we're all trying to get the same thing. We want love, community, connection, shelter, care. And sometimes we inelegantly make that harder in the world through like different ways that we choose to cope. But I do think it was a neutralizing idea, or even one that kind of pointed toward, you don't have to ask for forgiveness. You just are what you are.
That's really, really interesting. I think about forgiveness a lot. If somebody were to forgive me for something, it's like, it doesn't matter. I don't feel anything. Like if I did something wrong, I still have to like atone. Like I have something to do. Like the forgiveness is not interesting to me. It doesn't change what I've done. It doesn't make my mistake any different. I have to like be active and find a new way of being or whatever the problem is.
One of my best therapists was like, look at their actions, not their words. And I point that at myself as well. There's like an abuse narrative that runs through this book. There's, you know, all sorts of different kind of quote unquote betrayals. And some of them, I was the person to incur that harm on someone else. I just wanted to shake up the binary of like who's the good person, who's the bad person in these kinds of dynamics that are come by honestly and through generations of repetition and coping and dealing with their own pain and whatnot. And I was as well. And so I guess I'm always in my own journey with these stories. I have to always turn the mirror back on myself. It's way more complex than just, oh, you did me harm, so like ask me for forgiveness and then it's over. It's like, no, we got to live the rest of this life in the same world together. So let's act in ways that reflects our heart.
It's an interesting topic. Like there's the animals and then there's the people and there are the behaviors and then there's the substances too, are kind of also animals, and none of these things care if you forgive them. Maybe the people do.
Yeah. Some of this really came to me in this like research that I was doing, where this seems very basic, but finding out that we have the exact shaped plug in our bodies that we're born with that opiates plug into. There's a real reason why people become so addicted to these substances. And it's partly because it hooks us up with a very like innate part of our first sense of love and care. Tracking that backward really helped me in some ways reframe the way I even saw the substances themselves, not even being good or bad, but just part of what we are drawn to as humans for some sense of comfort, release, freedom, you know, all the things that I think we're all looking for in some way.
Yeah, I hear you. I think that's one of the best things about our like budding modern understanding about this. Listening to NPR and reading these books and stuff like that, it's really nice to find out that that's real. Attachment, of course, has to have something to do with that feeling of care. You sent this out, I guess you directly submitted this to publishers for a long time. Is that what you were describing earlier?
Yeah, I mean, in poetry, it's, I would say, like a true gauntlet because you have to go through the contests and there's very few direct submissions that you can do. And even if you are, it's like highly, highly competitive. Like, we're talking about 1,000 other manuscripts that you're up against. It had been a finalist a couple times for contests. And so I kind of knew that there was something going on that was good or that somebody recognized as being a book. But I think I, started to get a little lost in that process because, I mean, just the bare bones of it is it takes time. It's expensive. It's disheartening to keep believing in the book as it is without thinking, oh, I just need to go change something else about it so then they'll like me. Like it kind of pushes on some of the most like primordial parts of our ego or something. And so, I don't know, I had a couple friends in like that group I told you about that were just like, keep sending it out. And so my friend Ray Gorond, who you know as well, she had a book published through Cornerstone and told me like, it's a wonderful press. The editor is wonderful. They do a direct submission where you don't have to pay a fee or do a contest. I sent it out and I think I got the acceptance within 2 weeks, and it kind of blew my mind how easy it felt at that point after so many years of getting no's. And so I'm really grateful to them for the humane nature of their process. And also they're wonderful. They're a teaching press. And so all the students are learning how to do this work with, your manuscript, and they're lovely. And because I do that work too here at our university, I think I really valued being able to work with a press who did that as well. Yeah, it all happened strangely easily at the end, but it felt like a lot of years of, should this be out in the world? Should I keep trying? And then, eventually just being like, all right, let's do this one last submission.
I feel like I would be like compelled to just self-publish it or like publish it with the press that I was running or something like that.
That was a thought, not for our press here at Chico State, but it was more like, I know how to do this work. I could just make the book and put it out in the world. Like I could just pay the money. But I think you do want the collaboration that happens with an editorial group, and you want help promoting it and all of those things. And I think, just if I'm being honest, you also want somebody else to have said yes to you than you're just yourself. So I don't know. I do feel like the poetry aspect of publishing is just, I kept thinking like, how could we rework this? This seems like getting through the eye of the needle. There's so many contests and so much money. And also you just start to see like, this just probably not going to happen. A friend of mine, she finally got to the point where she had probably like 4 books finished and she hadn't had one of them published. And at one season, she was like, I'm putting all of them out there and I'm putting them all on every contest. So it was like putting everything on black and red. That's how she got her first book. But it was like, she really had to like play to win and put everything out there. I do think it takes a tenacity, and what I tell my students a lot is it's a numbers game. It's real human beings that are behind these contests. Sometimes it's just the particular group of people that are reading manuscripts. You do have to just keep sending out and become as neutral to rejection as you possibly can, because the people who I think end up getting published are the ones who are tenacious and who keep at the process. It's not like a luck thing as much as it is treating it like an administrative part of your writing process.
I often think about this. I've edited a bunch of lit mags and we have one now, and it's such a personal preference. Like, I'm not going to accept anything that has the word dragon in it. I mean, I can't even imagine, ironically, that I would, find something so,
Yeah, I think it's like coming to terms with the fantasy you had about being a writer or in writing communities when you first start. I'm going to be discovered, or this person is going to automatically want to mentor me or love me or whatever. And over time being like, no, I actually have to find my communities. I have to give back to this space as well. I have to be a good reader and citizen of the literary world that I want to exist in. And sometimes I think we're also not seeing ourselves as being participating in all of it. That's how this thing runs. Our communities in the literary world are run by people, often for free, and because it's for the love of the thing. And so, you really have to kind of believe in the entirety of it, not just your part.
I think that's a really good point. I was going to ask you, like, how did you end up forming that really long group of poetry friends? Was that an outshoot of a class that y'all took? How did that come together?
When I first got my master's in poetry, all of the people I had been in a cohort with, who are still some of my dearest friends, they all moved away and they all went to PhD programs or MFA programs. And I had a little kid at the time and was like, I can't move. I got to start teaching. And I was lamenting about this to my mentor, and she was like, hey, you got to figure this out. Go volunteer somewhere, find some people who want to do this with you. You need to kind of like let go of this magical way of thinking about it, because I had a wonderful cohort. Grad school for me was a really, really transformational time. So I immediately started volunteering at this art gallery and started working, with local writers. And a friend of mine was like, hey, I have a bunch of kind of adjacent people that I used to know in my MFA program, and they're all doing this 10-poem thing. You won't know any of them, but do you want to join? And I thought, okay, like the thing that was at first very shocking to me is because they had no context for who I was at all in the world. I think I got some of the most honest feedback from them because they could make no assumptions about the speaker of the poem or the work or know anything about me or my life or my history. I came in a stranger, and in some ways it was some of the most instructive feedback I've ever gotten, in part because we were really just there for the work. I learned a ton about how to give feedback from them, and they're all very different. A lot of the poems in this book were drafted in those 10-poem seasons over many years.
I love how these little micro communities appear. Starting your career teaching when you have a kid is such a thing. Do you want to talk at all about that? I feel like a lot has changed around that. A lot has stayed the same. I mean, I feel like it's such a different experience when you don't have young children and you're trying to start a writing career.
I mean, my child was born when I was 18, so, I wasn't really barely an adult myself. I had barely just gotten out of high school and started junior college when they were born, and every little jump in their life led to a little more freedom and a little more space for me to follow my own professional ambitions. When I transferred to the 4-year college was when they went to preschool. I just did everything in tandem to growing up and having a family. And so it was just never negotiable. And in some ways, I wouldn't say I was ashamed, but I also felt very different than other students. So if I had something going on at home that I needed to deal with, I would just not say what it was. Later on, some of my professors like, yeah, I didn't know you had a child until I had worked with you and for like a year or more, because it felt like this thing I couldn't reveal, or else I would be seen as less than or less capable or have less capacity. In some ways, that's really different now. I observe in my own students, their children are part of their life in a very forward way. They're very open about what they're dealing with. And I think that's probably a much healthier way to be. In some ways, it was like having a secret life or something. Like I can hold all the work and burdens of being a student or being a teacher and not make anyone else have to deal with that. It's wonderful now that I'm in my 40s and they're in their 20s and we have a wonderful relationship, but it was hard. It was hard to do everything at once.
It resonates with me when you said having this separate life. I felt and still often feel like it's just two different lives, like professional life and my kids. I don't want people to know if I have to miss work because of my kids, because I think that it's going to make them trust me less or something like that. But yeah, it's such a hustle. And when you said doing everything all at once, I think that's really the sort of key. It's like this whole thing about having it all, but maybe not at the same exact time with all the same expectations would probably be a little bit more what feminists were hoping for.
Right. Now you have to do everything.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to say about your book? The landscapes are really striking to me. It's something that I wrote down often when I was reading it.
Well, I'm glad it came across to you. I mean, I do feel like the landscape is an entity in and of itself in this book. In part, it's this place that my brain returns to over and over again as the setting for a lot of events or what happened, and I grew up in a really like rural area of Northern California, not that far from where I live now, like an unincorporated part of another small town, and no sidewalks, no streetlights. Every few houses are kind of like falling down. In some ways, like it's the scene that's just ongoing in my memory. It may have stopped when we moved away from there, but it's kind of like the backdrop of where my memory happens. Describing some of that was necessary for me to move through it, and I still find it to be so beautiful and ruinous. I think that's probably why I'm attracted to it too, is that juxtaposition always finds its way into my writing of the beauty plus the broken.
One thing that speaks to me through like all literature that is by people who grew up in rural areas is that there is a really similar experience, a really similar thrum, a really similar sense of like danger and beauty, or like violence and beauty, or death and beauty. These two things like existing at the same time that I think are not, this is not the same for city people. I think that people who grew up in cities have a very different thing that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of my experience was, my dad was dealing with substance use disorder in my childhood. And so a lot of times people bring chaos closer when that's going on. So there were things that I witnessed or saw or was around that maybe I wouldn't have been otherwise. So it was like the place plus context, plus, the dynamic of the family, and it's all bound up together for me. I wanted to share this thing that I read earlier. It was a Sharon Olds poem, and I won't read the whole thing, but basically she was talking about how finding the small little beautiful things was something that she learned from trying to find the beautiful, lovable things about her father, who was not that way for her. And the end of the poem says, "I am doing something I learned early to do. I'm paying attention to small beauties, whatever I have, as if it were our duty to find things to love, to bind ourselves to this world." I kind of think about that in the terms of like the ruin plus the beautiful. It's human. It's maybe like a poet sensibility or writer sensibility to always be seeking like the kind of beautiful edge of a thing. So I think it's a coping mechanism. It's a human thing we do. And it's also a poetic or a writerly thing to do, to seek the small thing in the much larger hardship or challenging moment.
That's like one of the hardest things to do sometimes. And it's really cool that there's just this group of people who are like, I'm probably never going to get paid to do this really hard thing and share it with a couple of people. And that's like the heart of my life.
I don't know about you, but I kind of feel like I can't not do it. And it helps me live. It grounds me. It keeps me connected to other people. And I often will say, like, to my students, poetry has really paid me nothing, but it's given me all the best things in my life. My closest friends, the best experiences, connections to people I never would have known otherwise. All of that happened through these words that I just felt compelled to write, whether they had an audience or not.
Ars Poetica. Wild onions peek through wet earth, small organs gleam clean under the calico's loving tongue. Burn pile of backlot tangles, leg broken from the seat. I tell you this backward, comfort at the threshold, before stepping out the back door. Our first house, yellow as a page aflame. Brittle boards grimacing a perimeter. Under corrugated plastic and soil, the sagging animal pen, 3 lizards' refuge in the underneath. Some places, you can't find the bottom, only remains. I drop into the dark, try to pull the objects back up. Forgive the animal. I am trying to remember us. I am trying to forget us. To write this, I must do both. I have to stay my hands, even in this moment, in order to keep them from writing those same unforgotten forgettings again. Don't look, my mother would say, holding her palms over my eyes, and I would allow this blindness, retreating into my imagination, where the thing being hidden was much more grotesque. But memory, I think I understand, is like a broken plate, picking up the shards, you assemble the fragments. Holding it up, it breaks again. You rebuild it with what's left. Each time you hold it up to inspection, it shatters, and eventually it doesn't resemble its original shape. Addiction can be like this too, returning to the point of origin, the pleasure 1,000 times more pleasurable than merely being alive. And yet it never comes back together in that earliest way. It transforms and depletes until you are holding handfuls of shards. Nothing and everything made sense about his addiction. It was literal, which is why I struggle to find apt metaphors, why I keep getting sent back down the same neural pathways and find myself confused by the doubling, the then alongside all the joy that came after. Thank God for the joy. It is a living wall I must climb to peer over. Most of the time, I don't want to see what's back there. And yet, decades sober. Patterns don't disappear, they fade. Like the grass's 5 o'clock shadow on the path you no longer walk. You see the way, but don't take it. There is hope as long as there is life. There are the damages. Both are good when held up to the other possible beginnings. When he came home, he pulled weeds from the boxes and it looked like joy. Ecstasy born from everything, not death. Forgiveness arrives daily, still, like a beloved stray who lives between these years and the others. Suppose it might always need softness and milk before we sit down to each other. The occasion, these decades and riches found in being, hands scarred and aged and holding.